Pivot too late? Ask Dr. Copper. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Insights, brought to you by Ainsley Bullion and the Gold and Silver Standard. Today, we welcome back Sam, who joined us for the first time last week, who's been doing another great deep dive, really, into a lot of things that are happening in the economy at the moment. We really enjoyed having you on last week, Sam, so welcome back, and we're looking forward to your deep dive again this week.
Thanks, Chris.
Um, so it was quite a broad article that you wrote for today's news, covering quite a lot of areas. But I thought we'd start off similarly to how the article started off by looking at that credit card data, because that's something we've talked about a little bit in the past here, but you really highlighted a couple of key points around that. So it looks like that spending is on the rise, and that should generally be good for the economy, you would think. But what's your take on that?
Yes, it is good in the short term that money is getting around. That's essentially what stimulus tries to achieve every time. And if people are doing that on their own, that's a really great thing for getting money around the system, getting blood pumping through the system. The bad thing is when credit card debt is up 20% in the first quarter of 2023 compared to 2022. Not only that, but personal loan balances are up 26% in the same timeframes. That type of spending does not illustrate people doing their leisure spending. That type of spending illustrates that people need to use. Yes, in the short term, they are spending, but in the long term, it does show that they're essentially just running out of options, which is a huge negative.
So you're really saying there that because generally when we see credit card spending and make that positive correlation, we think that, oh, well, it's good because the consumer's getting out there. But you're saying it's not actually the consumer getting out there. It's sort of the consumer just struggling to survive, really. That's what that spending is.
Yes, there's a pretty clear dichotomy in credit card spending. So one type of credit card spending is for luxury and because people have extra money and they want to get rewards and things like that. And the other type of credit card spending is, I guess, what you could call desperation spending,
Yep.
where they don't really have many other choices. And then personal loans, obviously, those are notorious for very high interest rates. So the balances on those spiking 26% is not usually a good thing for an
Yeah,
economy.
fair enough. But if there is a crash, because we're seeing lots of conflicting data at the moment, but the consensus seems to be that some sort of crash could be coming. Wouldn't you look at it as central banks can just cut rates again and save the markets? Like that's a narrative that's out there. Do you think that's the case, that central banks could just come in and solve this problem, make everyone whole again by cutting rates and putting us back onto the path to prosperity?
That does look like what everyone's waiting for. And it looks like a lot of traders are trying to call the Fed's bluff and say they're going to pivot earlier than they stated. Now, there is a problem with that. I mean, if you're a trader, okay, you can try to speculate. But if you're an individual, like these individuals who have credit card debt and they're, paying exorbitant interest rates and they're defaulting, a pivot is not going to give that money back. So once someone goes bankrupt or once someone defaults, they don't get that back. Once a pivot happens, they can essentially just take more debt that's better priced, or they can refinance. But all these months of pain are not just given back to the consumer. And then if a pivot happens, the price of everything goes up anyway. So if the price keeps going up, that money that they're now getting is going to be worth less and less. So it's a really difficult cycle to get out of for a regular consumer.
Yeah, right. So I suppose following on from that, then it seems like the stimulus of the last few years was much larger than what happened in the GFC. So why do you think we don't feel that directly then? Because it's sort of what you're just saying there, that it's a bit complicated. Is that what you think happens here? That even though the stimulus is so large, that we're not necessarily going to feel it like we did? Because after the GFC, let's remember, we went on a massive bull run that lasted a very long time. So are you potentially arguing that that's not the case this time, or how do you see it?
Yes, well, one of the basic fundamentals in economics is diminishing returns. And there are a couple reasons for that. So one is to do with basic mathematics as a percentage. If there's a small pool of money and you increase the money supply, say 5%, that's quite exciting for people. But the same amount of money, once the money supply is bigger, you need a larger amount of money to get the same percentage. And the amounts have been getting increasingly large. If you remember back after 2020, when Republicans and Democrats in America were arguing about if they should have a $2 trillion or a $4 trillion stimulus bill, and that pushed gold near all-time highs, and eventually it didn't happen and it fell. Well, much more than that's been printed, and it hadn't even reached the same level again. So as the pool gets bigger, a bucket of water in a bucket of water is a huge increase, but a bucket of water in an ocean is almost nothing. Now, there's also, from a system point of view as well. Now, with economics, people like to be really, I guess, just linearly extrapolate and just look at things like debit and credit. So if there's not enough money here for a year, you can just put it all back later and then it will balance, just like an accounting book. But the thing is, this takes time as well. Like, if you think about yourself, your own body, we take stimulus. So I have some stimulus right here. I'm not anti-stimulus. If I'm too tired to ride my bike into work in the morning, I could have a bit of coffee, and then I would suddenly have enough energy to get into work. I could just sleep some other time. But, with an economist brain or a modern monetary theory brain, why don't I just have 20 of these and then I can go win the Tour de France? Well, it just doesn't work like that, because my system can't actually even deal with that much stimulus. And it's the same if you look at businesses as well. If you look at a really closed case, like if there's a farmer, say a potato farmer, and he wants to be more productive, if you gave the farmer $1 million, he could be more productive. He could probably buy a brand new tractor. He could hire some new employees, and that might increase production for him. But if you keep giving him more and more millions, it's not going to make a better tractor be invented. He might end up with too many workers, which are all doing part-time, and the productivity starts to dip. And all you end up with is just really expensive potatoes at the end of the year. So that's just diminishing returns in action.
Some excellent analogies, and really does explain that concept quite well, I think. I really like the idea that you're highlighting that it just more money doesn't fix the problem. But economists have been saying all sorts of things around this, because they've effectively been arguing that it can fix a problem, and you're highlighting that we have this diminishing marginal utility issue. But where can we look then? If we can't really just look at the straight numbers, and we can't just look at how much more stimulus is coming as the solution, where can we look to see where we actually sit in this economic cycle?
Well, as we talked about before, there's someone you can look to, and it's called Dr. Copper. So that's the price of copper, and you can't get you can't really get less biased than copper, because it's such a core thing in the economy. If you look at any appliance, electronic products, vehicles, pretty much everything has copper in it. So what you can usually see first, before consumers actually stop spending, before retail stores stop stocking so many items, is you actually see less copper being purchased. And then less copper being purchased makes a slump in the copper price. And then that means there are less deliveries and less production of retail products. And then that means there's not as much for people to buy. They're anticipating that people are not going to be buying as much. And this can happen, 8 months before a recession or several months before a recession. And what we're seeing in the copper price now is the recent break of a support level yesterday of about $3.70. So about 3.70 copper spiked down and broke a support level. And it looks like it could potentially fall to the $3.20 level, which is quite a big fall. If you look at
percentage-wise, that's a big drop, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes. So roughly a potential 12% fall coming in the price of copper. And what does this mean? Well, it could mean, purely from a support and resistance, point of view, this could mean that reduced price of copper is coming from less purchases coming through, from an anticipation of less people being able to buy expensive goods. So that's what copper has been saying about the market, and that's what helps hopefully provide some clarity between analysts who are saying everything will be fine, we'll just pivot, and we're going to have catastrophe. Hopefully this is somewhere in between.
Yeah, I like that idea that it really is unbiased in that regard, because you're just looking at what is actually happening versus sort of all this narrative, and there's certainly a lot of narrative out there. To wrap this up, I just wanted to ask you specifically about what's happening at the moment with the S&P 500 and the gold price, because we've seen both of them rising recently, but there have also been spikes in the opposite direction. So it's this volatility theme. We've been talking about that quite a bit on Insights. Can you maybe wrap up today by talking to us a little bit about your perspective around the S&P, gold, what's happening with these this volatility?
Yes, well, the S&P 500 and gold have a lot in common. The thing they have a lot in common is they're not the US dollar. So some people look at, if the economy was a junkyard, the S&P 500 is trying to outrun the junkyard dog, and gold is staying out of the junkyard. So that's essentially, they look similar until it gets too dangerous. And what you can see is some spikes in the opposite direction. And those spikes actually coincide with news headlines about First Republic and these banks that are having issues. And the reason why they're starting to diverge potentially is because, the S&P can outrun the US dollar, but these companies can go out of business. Banks can fail. When you see banks themselves failing, that gives people the idea, hey, businesses could fail as well. And putting all money into businesses, look, it could work out or it could go the wrong way. But if you look at gold can't really go out of business. It's an element on the periodic table. It's something that's taken out of the ground. It doesn't really go out of business. And if it's doing similar movements to the S&P to escape the devaluation of the dollar, and then one is having shocks when there's a banking crisis, you can clearly see why gold has had these spikes and why gold's broken all-time high compared to the Australian dollar as well.
Yep. And that's a very common theme that we see coming up over and over again as we have these discussions, that when you look beneath all of the discussion and all of the rhetoric and all of the narratives, it comes back to this idea of monetary debasement, and having assets that sit outside the system allow you to protect against this.
Yes, exactly.
Well, Sam, thanks again. I think I love your analogies. I think the audience loves your analogies. It just makes it really accessible, this information, and you've really covered a broad cross-section of data and information today. So thank you once again for that. We'll keep you coming back, I think.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Great to be on again.
And thanks everyone for watching. That's us for this week. If you have any questions, remember, reach out on the social platforms and we'll try and get back to you on those. Have a great end of the week and stay safe in the markets, everyone. We'll see you again next week.